The state dinner had been planned down to the final second. Every chair, toast, entrance, and conversation had been carefully controlled. But no protocol could contain what happened when Princess Charlotte lowered her head and tears began streaming down her face. Prince William saw his daughter, trying desperately not to cry. Then he looked across the table at Queen Camilla. Seconds later, the future king rose from his chair and brought the entire royal evening to a halt. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. King Charles opened the evening with authority, believing the gathering would display unity before guests. A state dinner, the formal banquet hosted by the sovereign for visiting leaders, carried ceremonial weight. It tested the family's discipline under pressure. Catherine understood that danger. She adjusted Charlotte's place setting, leaned close, and assured her daughter that she belonged there. Charlotte wanted only to make her parents proud. She answered politely and tried to hide the nerves William had noticed. The prince believed the occasion would strengthen her confidence. Instead, it exposed her to a wound no child should carry. Camilla turned toward the young princess during a pause. She told Charlotte she was not ready to carry Diana's legacy, and ordered her to remove the family brooch linked to her late grandmother before the next toast. Guests heard every word. The child gripped her chair. Her face fell. Then the tears came. William placed his napkin beside his plate, rose, and declared that the dinner would not continue while his daughter was being humiliated. His voice remained controlled, but the anger beneath it silenced the room. Camilla insisted she had corrected protocol, not attacked a child. He rejected the excuse. Royal discipline, he said, could never disguise cruelty. Charles remained seated as every guest turned toward him. The monarch did not order William back to his chair. He did not defend the queen consort. His silence gave the prince's decision royal force and left Camilla exposed before the audience she had tried to control. Catherine recognized the wording instantly. She had heard a version of that warning before, and her expression told William that this cruelty had not begun at the table. As she guided Charlotte away, the prince remained behind. He looked at Camilla and asked her to meet him privately. The dinner had ended. The reckoning had not. The tears that emptied the state dining room had not been caused by one cruel sentence alone. Behind them stood weeks of warnings, wounded pride, and a private struggle over Charlotte's place inside the monarchy. To the guests, Charlotte's tears lasted only a few painful seconds. To William and Catherine, they revealed something far deeper. Their daughter had entered the dinner, hoping to prove that she could carry royal responsibility without fear. Instead, she was made to feel that the memory of Diana was a privilege someone else could grant or remove. Around that wounded child stood 4 adults, each carrying a different fear about what her future might represent. Catherine sat beside Charlotte in a private room and gently wiped the final tears from her face. The Princess of Wales, the formal title held by the wife of the heir, had agreed that her daughter was ready for greater responsibility. Palace officials had begun discussing how Charlotte might one day support Prince George, especially during major ceremonies when the future monarch would need trusted family beside him. Now that confidence felt painfully misplaced, Charlotte had always appeared calm under pressure. She followed instructions, watched the adults around her, and understood when duty demanded silence. But this evening had turned those strengths against her. Catherine feared that palace service had exposed the child to an adult struggle she was too young to understand and too disciplined to challenge. William understood that danger better than anyone. He remembered being expected to remain composed through grief, public ceremony, and family conflict, while the world watched every reaction. The prince had promised himself that his children would never be forced to bury pain simply because the crown preferred silence. Seeing Charlotte trembling against her mother awakened the father before the future king. Camilla carried a very different fear. She understood the emotional power Diana still held within the family and across the country. Every brooch, memory, or comparison seemed to reopen a judgment she could never fully escape. Instead of separating that insecurity from Charlotte, the queen consort had allowed the young princess to become a symbol of a legacy she could not control. Charlotte finally lifted her head and told Catherine what had happened before the public rebuke. The child revealed it through a private conversation with her mother, speaking in broken sentences while trying not to cry again. Camilla had leaned toward her and whispered that wearing Diana's brooch made it look as though she was choosing sides. William's anger deepened when he heard those words. He had already sent a private written request asking that no one confront Charlotte about the jewelry during the dinner. That instruction had followed an earlier disagreement, meaning Camilla knew exactly how sensitive the subject had become. Charles entered the room and stopped. He saw his granddaughter pressed against Catherine's shoulder and understood what his silence had allowed. The king had tried to preserve unity by avoiding confrontation. Instead, he had protected the tension while leaving Charlotte unprotected. William returned moments later. He looked directly at his father and said the dinner had not been the first breach. It had been the final one. Then he named the place where everything had truly begun: a private rehearsal at Windsor. To understand why William ended a night of state ceremony, the family would have to return to the moment Camilla first tried to decide which royal memories Charlotte was permitted to carry. 2 weeks before the dinner, there had been no cameras, foreign guests, or raised voices. There was only a quiet protocol rehearsal inside Windsor Castle and a sapphire brooch resting in a velvet case. Yet that private moment became the true point of no return. Charlotte asked a simple question about honoring Diana. Camilla answered with a warning. William overheard enough to intervene, and from that instant onward, everyone involved understood that the next confrontation would not remain private. Charlotte stood beside Catherine as palace staff reviewed the jewelry approved for the coming state dinner. A protocol rehearsal was the private practice used to prepare royal family members for formal ceremonies, including where they would stand, what they would wear, and how they would move through the event. The young princess noticed a small sapphire brooch linked to Diana and quietly asked whether she could wear it as a tribute. Catherine approved the idea without hesitation. She understood that the brooch mattered because Charlotte saw it not as a political symbol, but as a connection to the grandmother she had never met. The princess also believed the gesture would steady her daughter during an evening filled with pressure. Camilla entered before the case could be closed. She looked at the brooch, then told Charlotte that the dinner was about the reigning monarchy, not old emotional symbols. The queen consort's words struck quickly. The child shut the velvet case and apologized, even though her mother had already given permission. Camilla did not stop there. She removed Charlotte from the rehearsal lineup and declared that the young royal was too emotionally impressionable for senior duty. William heard the final sentence from the adjoining room. The prince returned at once, reopened the case, and placed the brooch before his daughter. William told Camilla that Charlotte would attend the dinner. He also made one thing brutally clear: his child would not be shamed again. Catherine then guided the princess from the room, while Charlotte looked back at her father with fear and relief mixed together. William waited until they were gone before issuing his boundary. He warned Camilla never to use Diana's memory as a weapon against his children. His voice remained low, but the consequence was unmistakable. Another attack would force him to respond where the palace could no longer hide it. Camilla accused the heir of humiliating her before palace staff. He replied that she had created the humiliation by targeting a child. The queen consort closed the jewelry case and walked away without accepting his warning. Charles later received a documented account of the rehearsal from a senior aide. The king dismissed it as a misunderstanding and asked William to preserve calm. The prince agreed only after his father promised that Charlotte would never be confronted about the brooch again. Hours before the banquet, Camilla changed the seating plan and placed Charlotte within speaking distance of her. Catherine questioned the alteration, but was told it reflected diplomatic protocol. Now William understood the truth. His father had known. The warning had been clear, yet the system had still protected the person who broke it. The state dinner had not collapsed because William lost control. It collapsed because a promise had been broken, and he was now ready to confront the person who broke it, face to face. The guests were still being escorted from the palace when William entered the private anteroom. Camilla was already waiting. No aides were permitted inside. No advisors stood between them. When the door closed, the future king moved a chair away from the table and remained standing. The queen expected a discussion about protocol. What she received instead was a direct accusation. She had used a child's love for her grandmother to settle an adult battle over status. William had checked that Charlotte was safely with Catherine before entering. The anteroom, a small private room beside a formal hall, was meant for brief conversations away from public attention. Tonight, it became the place where years of buried resentment finally broke through. Camilla began speaking about jewelry rules. She said the brooch had created confusion, and that she had acted to protect royal order. The prince stopped her. He told her the issue was not ceremony, it was cruelty. William reminded the queen consort of the Windsor rehearsal. He repeated the promise Charles had given him. Charlotte would not be confronted about Diana during the dinner. Camilla admitted she knew about that assurance, but claimed she had never personally agreed to it. Camilla then defended her authority. She accused William of teaching his daughter that emotion could overrule discipline. The future king answered without hesitation. He said she was teaching Charlotte that powerful adults could humiliate children and hide behind tradition afterward. The accusation silenced her. William's restraint began to crack. He said Charlotte had not cried because someone corrected her. She cried because Camilla suggested that loving Diana meant betraying the family still alive. The prince told her no child should ever be forced to choose between memory and loyalty, between the dead and the living. Camilla pulled out a chair and asked him to sit. William pushed it gently back beneath the table. He refused. The future king then delivered the consequence. Until Charlotte received a direct and honest apology, Camilla would hold no private authority over George, Charlotte, or Louis. No instructions, no corrections, no closed-door conversations. Camilla's anger finally gave way to something darker. She admitted through the private face-to-face exchange that Diana's presence still followed her through every room, every comparison, and every public memory. The queen said she felt judged by someone who was no longer there to speak. William acknowledged the pain, but refused to let his daughter carry it. Camilla's fear might explain the attack. It could never excuse it. William turned toward the door. It opened before he reached it. Charles stood on the other side, his expression heavy. The king had heard enough to understand that silence was no longer neutral. By refusing to choose earlier, he had allowed the wound to deepen. Charles entered and ordered them both to remain inside. The confrontation had stripped away every excuse, leaving the monarch with a choice that would determine where real power now rested inside the royal family. Charles had spent years trying to prevent the past from controlling his reign. Now the past stood before him through his wife, his son, and the granddaughter still crying in another room. The king could defend Camilla and risk breaking William's trust, or support the heir and publicly weaken the woman beside him. He sat down slowly, removed his glasses, and placed them on the table. Then he asked one question: who had changed Charlotte's seat? Camilla answered first. She confirmed that she had approved the alteration, placing Charlotte closer to her during the dinner. The seating plan, the formal chart deciding where every guest sits at a royal event, had originally kept the young princess beside Catherine. William immediately said the change turned a supposed correction into something prepared in advance. Charles looked at his wife and asked why she had hidden that decision after promising calm. The queen consort replied that William had been allowed to use Diana's memory as a shield against discipline. The monarch heard the bitterness beneath her words. This was no longer about jewelry. It was about a wound Camilla had carried into a room where a child became the target. Anne entered moments later, after being summoned as the one person who had reviewed the original arrangement. Princess Anne confirmed that Charlotte was meant to remain beside her mother, and that no change had been authorized through the king's office. The royal sister spoke without drama, but her disappointment was unmistakable. William then challenged more than Camilla. He challenged the palace itself. The prince said senior adults were protected from embarrassment, while children were expected to absorb pain in silence. He warned Charles that George, Charlotte, and Louis would be removed from any future engagement where their dignity could not be guaranteed. Anne turned toward her brother and made the choice plain. She reminded him that Charlotte had remained seated, had not answered back, and had tried to hide her tears. William had disrupted the dinner, she said, but Camilla had endangered it. Royal service demanded discipline from adults before it demanded composure from children. Charles remained silent for several seconds. Then the king imposed the restriction. Camilla would no longer approve roles, seating, jewelry, or protocol instructions involving the Wales children. Every decision concerning them would pass through William and Catherine until trust was restored. The queen consort accepted the order without argument, though her expression hardened at the final words. Charles then dictated a formal palace record stating that the dinner had ended on his authority after a family welfare concern. The record, an official written account preserved by the royal household, protected Charlotte from blame and confirmed that William's intervention had been justified. Camilla rose and left without looking back. Outside the room, she summoned her private secretary and gave one cold instruction: cancel every engagement on her calendar. Charles had contained the confrontation inside the palace, but Camilla's withdrawal would ensure that its consequences spread through every corridor by morning. By sunrise, the state dinner tables had been cleared, but the emotional wreckage remained. Camilla's office canceled her appearances without explanation. Charlotte refused breakfast. William prepared to withdraw his children from the next royal engagement, while Catherine struggled to persuade their daughter that she had done nothing wrong. Behind another closed door, the Queen sat alone beside an untouched cup of tea, discovering that the most painful consequence was not the king's restriction, it was the family's silence. Camilla cancelled 3 forthcoming engagements and refused meetings with senior aides. Royal engagements, the official public duties carried out on behalf of the crown, were normally planned weeks in advance and rarely abandoned without a clear reason. Her sudden withdrawal sent confusion through the household and made one truth impossible to hide. The restriction involving the Wales children had damaged her authority. William changed his own plans just as quickly. He removed Charlotte from the following week's ceremonial appearance, refusing to make his daughter perform calm before the public while she was still carrying the pain of the dinner. The prince knew that one forced smile could protect the palace while deepening the wound inside the child. Charlotte sat quietly as Catherine encouraged her to eat. Then the young princess said the words her mother had feared. She believed the dinner would have continued if she had not cried. Catherine knelt beside her chair and told her the tears had not caused the crisis. An adult's decision to shame her had caused it. Camilla waited for Charles to enter her private rooms. He never came. The queen consort understood that canceling her appearances had not drawn sympathy from the family. It had made her look defiant at the exact moment when humility was required. Charles remained with William and senior advisors. The king received the altered seating plan and studied the handwritten change, placing Charlotte near Camilla. He folded the chart once, set it down, and told an aide that no explanation could erase deliberate preparation. His words were entered into a documented palace account, turning private suspicion into an official conclusion. Catherine later found a note beneath Charlotte's jewelry case. The child had written a short apology to her grandfather for spoiling his dinner. The message devastated both parents. Their daughter still believed she had to repair the failure of adults who should have protected her. William's anger hardened when palace advisors suggested that Charlotte appear beside Camilla to quiet speculation. He refused immediately. The future king would not use his child's presence to manufacture peace before a real apology existed. Night brought no relief. Charlotte finally asked to speak to her father alone. William entered her room prepared to promise protection, distance, and consequences. But the young princess did not ask for Camilla to be punished. She asked for something far more difficult. William entered his daughter's room prepared to promise protection, but Charlotte was about to ask for something far more difficult than punishment. There were no officials in the room, no prepared statements, and no royal titles between them. Charlotte sat beside her father and held the brooch that had caused so much pain. William expected her to ask never to see Camilla again. Instead, the young princess made a request that disarmed him. She did not want the queen publicly punished. She wanted Camilla to understand why the words had hurt and to promise that no other child would be treated that way. William told Charlotte she would not be required to attend any engagement involving Camilla until she felt safe. A royal engagement, an official public duty carried out on behalf of the crown, could demand smiles even when private wounds remained open. The prince refused to place that burden on his daughter again. Charlotte looked down at the brooch and explained why it mattered. Catherine had told her that Diana tried to notice frightened people and make them feel less alone. The young princess had wanted the sapphire piece to remind her to show that same kindness during the dinner. She had never meant it as a challenge. William admitted that his anger had taken him somewhere darker. He had wanted Camilla removed from all contact with George, Charlotte, and Louis. The future king believed distance was the only way to protect them. Charlotte asked one quiet question. Would that make the family kinder, or would it only make everyone more divided? The words stopped him. William understood that protection could become punishment when anger controlled it. He still believed consequences were necessary, but his daughter had shown him that revenge would not heal what had happened. Charlotte said she wanted a real apology, not one delivered before cameras, not one shaped by palace advisors. She wanted Camilla to speak privately and admit that remembering Diana did not mean rejecting Charles or anyone else in the family. The young princess then placed the brooch in William's hand. She said she would not wear it again until the family could see it without turning love into conflict. The prince closed his fingers around the sapphire and promised that she would never again be made ashamed of loving her grandmother. William changed his approach that night. Instead of demanding permanent exclusion, he sent Camilla a handwritten invitation asking her to meet Charlotte with Catherine present. He made the terms clear. The restriction involving the children would remain, but reconciliation was possible if the queen consort accepted responsibility without excuses. Camilla read the note twice. She reached for a pen, ready to dictate a formal answer, then stopped. Ceremony had caused enough damage. She agreed to attend without an aide, prepared statement, or defense. But before the meeting could happen, the story escaped the palace. Charlotte had shown the family a path toward healing, but outside the palace gates, the world was already deciding who had been cruel, who had been courageous, and who had failed to act. By the following morning, the secret was no longer containable. The halted dinner dominated broadcasts, front pages, and conversations outside Buckingham Palace. Yet the public did not focus on the abandoned banquet or the diplomatic embarrassment. It focused on one image, described by departing guests. William standing, while Charlotte wiped tears from her face. In a monarchy built on composure, the moment struck Britain with unexpected force. A future king had broken ceremony because his daughter could not. Buckingham Palace issued a controlled statement confirming that Charles had ended the state dinner early because of a private family welfare matter. The palace statement, an official message released on behalf of the monarch, was designed to protect the family and close the story quickly. It failed within minutes. Several guests had already described how William rose only after Charlotte began crying. Camilla's advisors pushed for a different explanation. They wanted the crisis framed as a misunderstanding involving jewelry protocol. William's office rejected that account at once. The prince would not allow his daughter's pain to be reduced to an argument over accessories, especially when the deeper wound involved Diana, loyalty, and public humiliation. The morning papers made their judgment brutally clear. One major London newspaper appeared with the headline, "Heir stops dinner for his daughter," above an illustration of an empty royal chair and a folded napkin. Broadcasters held up copies throughout the morning, turning William's refusal to continue into the defining image of the crisis. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. One mother placed a handwritten card beside the railings. It carried 6 simple words: "A princess is still a child." Cameras captured the message, and within hours, it spread across broadcasts and public discussion. Charles watched the coverage without speaking. The king felt relief that Charlotte was receiving sympathy, but the public support also wounded him. It suggested that the monarchy had needed outside outrage before protecting one of its own children. Camilla reacted first with anger. She believed the country had accepted William's version without hearing her defense. Then a broadcaster described the prince as a father who had chosen fatherhood before ceremony. The queen consort heard the sentence twice and finally understood what Britain had seen. Any attempt to defend her authority now would only deepen the harm. Palace officials prepared a proposal for Camilla and Charlotte to appear together publicly. Charles rejected it after consulting William. The monarch would not manufacture reconciliation for cameras. The queen had to face the child privately before the family could show unity again. That afternoon, Camilla entered the Wales family's sitting room alone. Charlotte sat between Catherine and William, waiting. The public had already delivered its judgment, but the only verdict that truly mattered would come inside a quiet room from the child, whose tears had stopped a state dinner. Camilla entered without an aid, speech, or official explanation. Charlotte sat between William and Catherine, the sapphire brooch resting unopened on the table. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the queen did something she had resisted throughout the crisis. She abandoned protocol and accepted blame. She admitted that fear of Diana's memory had shaped her words, that Charlotte had been made to carry a burden belonging to adults, and that William had been right to stop the dinner. Camilla chose the chair opposite Charlotte rather than the one at the head of the room. The private meeting carried no ceremonial authority, meaning no titles, formal statements, or palace officials could soften what had happened. William made one boundary clear. His daughter did not have to answer, forgive, or appear beside anyone for public reassurance. Camilla looked directly at the young princess and said the brooch had never been the true problem. Her own insecurity had been. The queen admitted that telling Charlotte she had chosen sides was unfair, unkind, and completely wrong. She offered no defense and did not blame protocol. Charlotte answered through the private conversation with a truth she had held since the dinner. She said the words made her feel that loving Diana caused pain to the living members of her family. Camilla replied that no child should ever be asked to protect adults from their memories. William accepted the apology, but he did not remove the consequence. Decisions involving George, Charlotte, and Louis would remain with him and Catherine. The prince told Camilla that trust could return only through conduct, not rank. Catherine then slid the velvet case toward her daughter. Charlotte opened it but did not put the sapphire brooch on. Instead, she asked Camilla to hold it. The queen took it carefully and said Diana's memory belonged to the children who loved her story, not to palace rivalries. For the first time, the object that had divided them became a test of humility. Charles met Charlotte later that day. The king apologized for remaining silent at the table and admitted that a monarch's attempt to avoid conflict could become permission for harm. His granddaughter accepted the apology, but he understood that the lesson would shape the rest of his reign. The state dinner was never recreated. No false photograph was released. The monarchy changed its internal guidance, meaning the private rules governing royal conduct, so young royals could not be corrected or reassigned without a parent present. William's decision became a defining statement about the crown's future. Tradition lost its value the moment it demanded silence from the vulnerable. Charlotte's tears did not weaken the monarchy. They forced it to become more human. There was no further confrontation to come. The dinner remained unfinished. The restriction remained in place, and the lesson stood permanently. Under William's future monarchy, dignity would never be sacrificed merely to keep a ceremony moving. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.